So we shall talk about the Pallavas. There is no scholarly consensus about the origin of Pallavas. Some early scholars held the view that the word Pallava was a variant of Pahlava, known as Parthians, who moved from western India to eastern coast of the peninsula during the wars between Shakas and the Shatavahanas in the 2nd century CE. But many scholars today regard them native to South India or with some mixture of North Indian blood. So, couple of scholars say they are actually the Parthians, a variant of Parthians known as Pahlava, which gradually became Pallava. But a lot of people say it's a mixture. The Pallavas were associated with Mandalam, Thondai Mandalam, the land between North Pennar and North Vellar rivers. Simha Vishnu is believed to have conquered the Chola country up to Kaveri and consolidated his dynastic rule started by his father Simhavarman. Simha Vishnu, vanquishing the Kalabharas, conquered the land up to Kaveri, thereby coming into conflict with the Pandyas. Simha Vishnu's successor, Mahendravarman I, 590 to 630, whom Appar converted from Jainism to Shaivism, was a patron of arts and a poet and a musician in his own right. During Mahendravarman's reign, the army of Pulakeshin II annexed the northern part of Pallava kingdom and almost reached the Pallava capital of Kanchipuram. Okay, the capital of Pallava was Kanchipuram, and the Pulakeshin II almost reached Kanchipuram. Subsequently, during the reign of Narasimhavarman I, the Pallava managed to settle scores by winning several victories over Chalukyas with the aid of their ally Manavarman, a Sri Lankan prince who later became ruler of the island kingdom. So, during Pulakeshin II, they almost reached Kanchipuram, but after him, the Narasimhavarman I, he had a couple of victories over Chalukyas, and with the help of Ali Manavarman, who was the Sri Lankan prince, who later became the king also, he helped them and they settled. Okay. The climax was Narasimhavarman's invasion of Chalukyan kingdom and his capturing of the Badami. Narasimhavarman claims to have defeated the Cholas, Cheras and Kalabharas. Two naval expeditions dispatched to help Manavarman were successful, but the Sri Lankan ruler subsequently lost his kingdom. The Pallava-Chalukya conflict continued during subsequent decades. Some intermittent peace. During the reign of his grandson Parmeshwarman I, Vikramaditya of the Chalukya kingdom invaded the Pallava country. Parmeshwarman fought against him with the support of Gangas and Pandyas. As a result, the Pallavas came into conflict with the Pandyas in the south. In the early 9th century, the Rashtrakuta king Govind III invaded Kanchi during the reign of Pallava Dantivarman. Okay, this is an important point. Dantivarman's son Nandivarman III, aided by Western Gangas and Cholas, defeated the Pandyas at the Battle of Sri Purambiyan or Tirupurambiyan. Aparajita, grandson of Nandivarman III, lost his life in a battle fought against Aditya I of the Chola kingdom, who invaded Tondai Mandalam. This sealed the fate of Pallavas. Thereafter, control over Tondai Mandalam passed into hands of Cholas. Okay, so this is a small information here. Though the Kerala region seemed to have been under the rule of Chera Perumals during the period from 6th to 9th century, little is known about its history until the beginning of the 9th century. So between 6th and 9th century, there is very less information about the Kerala's Chera Perumals. Pallava administration. Under the Pallavas, kingship was held to be of divine origin and was hereditary. The king took high sounding titles such as Maharaja the Raja were borrowed from North Indian traditions. The king was assisted by a group of ministers, and in the later Pallava period, this ministerial council played a prominent part in the state policy. Some of the ministers bore semi-royal titles and may well have been appointed from among the feudatories. Distinctions are made between Amatyas and Mantris. Okay, so basically they are said to be as diplomat. The Mantrin is basically a diplomat and Amatya is a counselor. Mantri Mandala was a council of ministers. Rahasyadikrita was a private secretary of the king. Manikkapandaram Kappan was an officer in charge of the treasury. Okay, Manikka is basically valuables, Pandaram is the treasury, and Kappan is the keeper. So, Manikka Pandaram Kappan. Kodukku Pillai was the officer of gifts. They were central officers under Pallava kings. These are very important for the prelims. Kosa Adhyashaka was the supervisor of Manikka Pandaram Kappan, the officer in charge of the treasury. Okay. Judicial courts were called as Adikarna Mandapa and the judges called as Dharmadhikarins. Fines are mentioned in Kasakudi plates of Nandivarman Pallava as Karandandam. Karana Dandam. Okay, Dandam is basically the fine. Fine in superior or higher court, and Adi Karana Dandam, fine in the district level. So this is the the copper plate of Kasakudi. Governor of a province was advised and assisted by the officers in charge. Districts who worked in close collaboration with local autonomous institutions. Largely is an advisory capacity. They were built on local relationships of caste, guilds, craftsmen, and artisans, such as weavers and oilmongers, students, ascetics, and priests. There were assemblies of villagers and also representatives of districts. General body meeting of the assembly were held annually, and meeting of smaller groups were responsible for implementing policy. Land grants. The land ownership was with the king. Okay, the land was owned by the king, who could make revenue grants to his officers and land grants to Brahmanas, or else continue to have land cultivated by small scale cultivators and landlords. The latter was most common practice. So he can give that land. The king is having the land. He is the owner. Okay, so he can grant the land to officers, or grant the land to Brahmanas, or can have the land cultivated by some small scale cultivators and landlords, which was much more preferable and was happening. Okay, crown lands were leased out to tenants at will. The status of the village varied according to tenures prevailing. The village was with an intercaste population paid land revenue. Okay, the village with intercaste population. Okay, remember the Brahmadeya villages were denoted to single Brahman or a group of Brahmans. These villages tended to be more prosperous than others because no tax was paid. Okay, so you can see in the previous thing, the intercaste population villages had to pay taxes. The Brahmadeya villages, which was donated to a Brahman or a group of Brahmins, so there was no need to pay any tax. Okay, then there was Devadana villages. Okay, donated to a temple. Okay, and the revenue was consequently received by the temple authorities and not by the state. Okay, the revenue was received by the temple authorities. The temple authorities assisted the village by providing employment in the service of the temple. Okay, This last category of villages gained greater significance when in last centuries the temples became the center of rural life. During the Pallava period, the first two types of villages were prominent. Okay, so these kind of villages and these kind of villages were predominant in the Pallava period. Okay, in 1879, 11 plates held with a ring of copper, its two ends soldered and stamped with a royal seal depicting a bull and a lingam, the Pallava symbol, were discovered in Uruputtukottam near Puducherry. It records a grant of a village made in the 22nd year of the king Nandivarman, which is around 753 CE. The inscriptional text commences with eulogy of the king in Sanskrit, followed by details of the grant in Tamil and concluding verse in the Sanskrit. So, what kind of life was there in the villages? In the village, the basic assembly was the Sabha, which was concerned with all matters related to the village, including endowments, lands, irrigation, cultivated, punishment of crime, the keeping of census and other necessary records. Village courts dealt with petty criminal cases. At a higher level, in towns and districts, courts were presided over by government officers, with the king as the supreme arbiter of justice. So, in villages, the petty criminal cases were dealt, but when those cases were bigger, and in the towns and districts, courts were presided by government officers. The Sabha was a formal institution, but it worked closely with Urdu, which include formal gathering of the entire village. Urdu. Was Above this was a district council which worked with Nadu or district administration. Village populated entirely or largely by Brahmanas preserved records of functioning of assemblies and councils. The link between the village assembly and the official administration was headman of the village. So headman of the village was the link between the village assembly and the official administration. Tank irrigation, a special category of land, Erripatti or tank land was known only in South India. This land was donated by individuals, the revenue from which was set apart for the maintenance of the village tank. Rainwater was stored in the tank so that land could be irrigated during the annual long dry spell. The tank, lined with brick or stone, was built through the cooperative efforts of the village, and its water was shared by all the cultivators. The maintenance of these tanks was essential to the village. Practically every inscription from Pallava period pertaining to rural affairs refers to upkeeping of the tank. So this shows the importance of the tank. Next in importance came wells. Water was distributed by canals, which were fitted with sluices to regulate the water level and prevent overflowing at the source. The distribution of water for irrigation was supervised by a special tank committee appointed by the village. Water taken in excess of allotted to a particular cultivator was taxed. So if a water is being used unnecessarily or in excess, it was taxed specifically. Okay. Revenue and taxation. Land grants recorded mainly on copper plates provide detailed information on land revenue and taxation. Revenue came almost exclusively from rural sources, mercantile and urban institutions being largely unplanned. Two categories of taxes were levied on the village. Okay, so there were two types of taxes. The land revenue paid by cultivator to state varied from 1 by 6th to 1 by 10th of the produce. Okay, and was collected by village and paid to state collector. In the second category were local taxes, also collected in the village, but utilized for services in the village itself. The tax money was spent for repairing irrigation works, illuminating the temple, etc. Okay, so the land revenue was 1/6 to 1/10 was collected by the village and paid to state collector. The second was the local tax, okay, which was collected in the village but was used in the village itself. It was not paid to the state. Okay, when the state land tax was inadequate, the revenue was supplemented by additional taxes on draught cattle, toddy drawers, marriage parties, potters, goldsmiths, washermen, textile manufacturers, weavers, brokers, letter carriers, and the makers of ghee. Okay, so these, if the land tax was not adequate for the treasury, they used to tax additionally on draught cattle, toddy drawers, marriage parties, etc. The loot and booty obtained in war added to the revenue of the state. Pallava considered war to be very important, and a series of sculptures depicting the important events connected with reign of Nandivarma Pallava, notably Pallava troops attacking a fort, are seen in the Vaikunta Perumal temple at Kanchipuram. This fort is depicted in the sculptures as having high ramparts with soldiers attacking it and elephants standing near it. So this is the Vaikunta Perumal temple, and you can see the different kind of sculptures it has. The Pallava army. Much of the state revenue went to maintain the army. The king maintained a standing army under his direct control. The army consisted of foot soldiers, cavalry, and small force of elephants. Chariots were by now almost out of use, and in any case were ineffective in the hilly terrains as much of the fighting took place there. Cavalry, though effective, was expensive because horses were to be imported. Okay, the Pallavas developed a navy, okay, and built dockyards at Mamalapuram and Nagapattinam. However, the Pallava navy was inconsiderable compared to the naval strength of the Cholas who succeeded them. Okay, so the Cholan navy was very much powerful than the Pallava. Trade. Kanchipuram was an important trading center in Pallava period. Okay, Kanchipuram is very important trading place. The merchants had to obtain license to market their goods. Barter system generally prevailed, but later the Pallavas issued gold and silver coins also. Merchants had their own organizations such as Manigravan. In foreign trade, spices, cotton textiles, precious stones and medicinal plants were exported to Java, Sumatra, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, China and Burma. Mamalapuram was an important seaport. Traders found guilds called themselves as Sudesi, Nanadesi, Ainururvar and others. Their main guild functioned at Aihur. Okay, the traders found guilds for themselves. Foreign merchants were known as Nanadesi. It had a separate flag with the figure of bull at the center, and they enjoyed the right of issuing Veera Sasanas. The jurisdiction of this guild stretched over entire Southeast Asia. The chief of this guild is registered in the inscriptions as Pattanaswami, Patnakilar and Dandanayakar. Its members are known as Ayovala Parmeshwar. So, maritime trade. Unlike in the Ganges plain, where large areas were available for cultivation, the regions controlled by the Pallavas and Chalukyas commanded a limited income from the land. The Pallavas and Chalukyas commanded a limited income from the land. Mercantile activity had not developed sufficiently to make a substantial contribution to the economy. The Pallavas had maritime trade with Southeast Asia, whereby now there was three major kingdoms. The Kamboja, which is actually the Cambodia now, Champa, which is Annam, Sri Vijaya, the southern Malaya Peninsula and the Sumatra. On the west coast, the initiative in the trade with West was gradually passing into the hands of foreign traders settled along the coast, mainly Arabs. Indian traders were becoming suppliers of goods rather than carriers of goods to foreign countries, and communication with the West became indirect via Arabs and limited to trade alone. Okay, so how was the society? Brahmins, as learned scholars in literature, astronomy, law, and others, functioned as royal counselors. Okay, so Brahmins were functioning as the royal counselors. Not only were they in teaching profession, they were also involved in agriculture, trade, and war. They were exempted from paying taxes and capital punishment. The Brahmanas were exempted from paying taxes and capital punishments. The next important social group which ruled the state was called Sat Kshatriyas or Quality Kshatriyas. Not all the Kshatriyas were of the warring groups, some of them were involved in trading as well. They also enjoyed the right to read the Vedas, a privilege denied to lower Varnas. The trading group maintained barriers for protection and founded trade guilds. The people who were at the bottom of the society worked in agriculture, animal husbandry, and handicraft works. People engaged in scavenging, fishing, dry cleaning, and leather works were positioned outside the Varna system. Most scholars agree that Aryanization or northern influence on the south picked up pace during the Pallava period. This is evident from the royal grants issued by the kings. The caste structure had firmly established. Sanskrit came to be held in high esteem. Kanchipuram continued to a great seat of learning. Okay, the followers of the religion were devoted to worship of Shiva. Mahendravarman was the first during the middle of his reign to adopt worship of Shiva, but he was intolerant of Jainism and destroyed some Jaina monasteries. Many of the great Nayanmars and Alvars, Shaiva and Vaishnava saints lived during this time. Buddhism and Jainism lost their appeal. However, Hyun Sang is reported to have seen at Kanchi 100 Buddhist monasteries and 10,000 priests belonging to Mahayana Buddhism. Okay, the Hyun Sang, he said like in Kanchi itself there are more than around 100 Buddhist monasteries and 10,000 priests. Growing influence of Brahmanism. Perhaps the most obvious sign of influence of Aryan culture in the south was preeminent position given to Brahmins. They gained materially through large gifts of land. Aryanization is also evident in the evolution of educational institutions in the Pallava kingdom. In the early part of this period, education was controlled by Jainas and Buddhists, but gradually the Brahmins superseded them. In the initial period, the education was controlled by Jainas and Buddhists, but gradually the Brahmins took over it. The Jaina, who had brought with them their religious literature in Sanskrit and Prakrit, began to use Tamil. Okay, the Jainas also started using Tamil in place of Sanskrit and Prakrit. Jainism was extremely popular, but the competition of Hinduism in the succeeding centuries greatly reduced the number of its adherents. In addition, Mahendravarman I lost interest in Jainism and took up the cause of Shaivism, thus depriving the Jainas of valuable royal patronage. The Jains had developed a few educational centers near Madurai and Kanchi and religious centers as one at the Shravana Belagola in Karnataka. But a vast majority of the Jaina monks tend to isolate themselves in small caves in hills and forests. Since they did not get any valuable royal patronage, they had to isolate themselves in small caves in hills and forests and do their meditation. Okay. Monasteries and mutts. Monasteries continued to be nucleus of the Buddhist educational system and were located in the region of Kanchi and the valleys of Krishna and Godavari rivers. Buddhist centers were concerned with the study of Buddhism. Particularly, this was a period of intense conflict between orthodox and heterodox sects. But Buddhism was fighting a losing battle. Okay, royal patronage, which the Buddhists lacked, gave an edge to the protagonists of Vedic religion. You can see here the Buddhists were trying to do their influence, but because of no patronage from the uh, dynasty or the kings, they had to get down. So slowly Buddhism was disappearing. Apart from university at Kanchi, which acquired fame equal to that of Nalanda, there was number of other Sanskrit colleges. The university at Kanchi was very much famous at that point of time. Sanskrit was recognized medium and also the official language at the court, which led to its adoption in literary circles. In the 8th centuries, the mutts, became very popular. This was a combination of a rest house, a feeding center, and an educational center, okay, which indirectly brought publicity to a particular sect with which it was associated. Popularity of Sanskrit. Mahendravarman I composed Matavilasa Prahasanam in Sanskrit. Two extraordinary works in Sanskrit set the standards for Sanskrit literature in the south. Bharavi's Kiratarjuniya, Dandin's Dashakumara Charita. Okay? Bharavi's Kiratarjuniya and Dandin's Dashakumara Charita. Dandin of Kanchipuram, author of the great treatise on rhetoric Kavyadarsa, seems to have stayed in Pallavas court for some time. Rock cut temples. Mahendravarman I is credited with the introduction of rock cut temples in the Pallava territory. Mahendravarman claims in his Mandagapattu inscription that his shrine to Brahma, Ishvara and Vishnu was made without using traditional materials such as brick, timber, metal and mortar. Mahendravarman's rock temples are usually the mandapa type with a pillared hall or the mandapa in front and small shrine at the rear or the sides. So this is Mandagapattu temple, which is a rock cut temple. You can see how beautifully it has been cut down.